Some cities die screaming. Fire, siege, ash. This one died with a signature. You are walking through a crack in the earth. The walls are sandstone, 80 meters high, close enough in places to touch with both hands. Above you, the sky is a blue thread. It is the year 100. For 3 days you have crossed a desert that kills the unprepared. And now this. A corridor cut by water and patience. Listen. Under your feet, in a carved stone channel, water is running through the desert. Whoever rules this crack rules everything beyond it. The walls lean apart. Light. And the mountain opens like a curtain, a facade 40 meters tall, carved into the living rock, glowing rose pink in the morning sun. They will call this city lost. The men who carved it would laugh. This is Petra. It will not fall like Troy. It will end quietly, by ink, by seals, by a new line drawn on a Roman map. It has 6 years left to be a kingdom. 600 years ago, the people of this city owned nothing but camels and the horizon. The Nabataeans, desert nomads, herders, guides, and, the old stories say, raiders. Rome calls them Arabs, and they discovered the one thing no empire ever beat. You cannot conquer people who know where the water is. Now they own the most expensive road on earth. Meet Tame, 24 years old, born inside these cliffs. His grandfather cut cisterns into the rock. His father led caravans across the sand. Tame does both bloodlines one better. He weighs the cargo. Every bale of incense that enters Petra passes under his hands, and the king's tax passes over them. He writes his tallies in a flowing desert script, right to left, the letters curving and changing, though he does not yet know what those letters will one day become. Today, the biggest caravan of the season arrives from the south, the dried tears of a desert tree, worth more than gold. And Tame is already late. To reach the scales, Tame walks the sick, the crack you entered through. He has walked it 5,000 times. Every visitor looks up at the cliffs. Tame, son of cistern cutters, looks at the walls. Along both sides run channels, an open groove on one side, a line of sealed ceramic pipes on the other, carrying a spring the world will one day name after Moses himself. The Nabataeans did not dig this gorge. An ancient earthquake split the mountain, and water did the rest. But everything else is theirs. 4 centuries ago, an army came to take this place. Soldiers of Antigonus, an heir of Alexander the Great. The Nabataeans simply vanished into the desert, and the desert gave the invaders nothing because the water was hidden. Secret cisterns sealed with plaster, invisible under the sand. The greatest army in the region drank dust and went home. That lesson built everything you're about to see. Here, water was never just survival. Water is the weapon. The sick bends, the light changes. Footsteps turn to echoes, camel bells to small bronze thunder. Then the rock opens and the great facade fills the world. 40 meters of carved mountain, columns that hold nothing. A broken pediment framing a solid stone urn. You know it as the treasury. Tame does not. No one in the year 100 calls it that. Its true name is lost. And here is the honest truth. It is almost certainly not a treasury at all. Most scholars believe it is a royal tomb, likely linked to Aretas IV, the greatest of the Nabataean kings, who died about 60 years ago. The urn at the top is clean, no legend of a pharaoh's gold, no bullet scars. Those belong to later centuries, and we will get to them. Today the stone is crisp, the edges sharp, and faint color still wakes under the sun. Look at the rock beside it, rows of shallow footholds climbing into the sky. The carvers started at the top and worked down, releasing the building from the cliff like a sculpture. No scaffold, just rope, bronze, and absolute certainty. Past the tomb, the gorge widens into a street of tombs, and then the city itself. Forget every photo of empty ruins. Petra in the year 100 is loud, painted, and crowded. A colonnaded street runs along the riverbed. Greek from one stall, Aramaic from the next, Latin haggling in the corner. Here is the famous pottery, bowls fired so thin they are called eggshell ware, painted with red leaves, light as paper in Tame's hand. And then the thing that stuns every newcomer, gardens. green trees in the desert, a pool the size of a small harbor with an island pavilion at its center, a dream built out of taxes. It is not for drinking, it is for show. In a land where water is life, the kings of Petra built a lake they did not need, purely to prove they could. That is what real power looks like. Tame, who weighs things for a living, has a private rule about this city. Pleasure is loud, accounting is quiet, and quiet things rule Petra. If this place already has you, take 1 second, subscribe and leave a like. It genuinely decides whether these reconstructions keep coming. Now back to the year 100, midday, horns on the southern road. The caravan walks in, camels swaying under their loads, 6 weeks out of the incense lands of southern Arabia. Tame steps to the scales, frankincense, pale golden tears of resin, bled from trees that grow in one corner of the world and nowhere else. Every temple from Egypt to Rome burns it. Every rich man's funeral demands it. Pliny will write that 1 camel's load, by journey's end, has cost nearly 700 denarii in tolls and feed, years of a soldier's pay spent on a single animal's walk, and that the empire bleeds 100 million coins a year, east and south, for luxuries like these. Take the exact figures with a grain of salt. Scholars still argue them, but a healthy cut of every load stays here under Tame's stylus. He counts the camels and frowns. 80. Last spring's caravan was 100. By the gate, a Greek shipmaster waits, talking too much. Men in Egypt, he says, have mastered the monsoon winds. Ships now run to India and back within a year. Tame writes his numbers and thinks, ships cannot cross sand. He is right, for now. Here is what no postcard will ever show you. Petra is a machine. Read the mountains like a blueprint. Dams across every side canyon, channels stepping down the cliffs terrace by terrace, cisterns sealed with waterproof plaster, some large enough to swim in. Ceramic pipes run beneath the walkways, their slope cut so finely the water neither stagnates nor bursts the joints. Engineers 2,000 years from now will study that gradient and call it close to ideal. Tame grew up in these tunnels. His grandfather sealed half of them. He still kneels and lifts a stone cover to listen, the way the old man taught him. A steady whisper is good. A hollow chatter means air. A dull silence means trouble. Today the line whispers. The city catches the winter rain of an entire mountain range, stores it, and spends it through the rainless summer like a careful banker. Strangers see a city of tombs. Tame sees a desert that has been defeated. Tens of thousands live in this dead, dry valley by some estimates, and there are fountains. But remember what this really is. Petra is not natural. It is an argument against nature, and every argument can be lost. Remember the dams above the Sikh. Before this day ends, you will see why they matter. Dawn smoke rises from the high place of sacrifice, a platform cut into a summit hundreds of steps above the rooftops. Today, Tame only bows at the street shrine. And here is what startles every foreign visitor. The god has no face. Dushara, Lord of the Mountains, a plain block of stone cut square, set in a niche, anointed with oil. Beside him, a slab with 2 carved eyes and a stylized nose, the goddess Al-Uzza. The Nabataeans, for the most part, do not carve their gods as people. Think about that. A nation that can carve anything, 40-meter facades, theaters, tombs like palaces, chooses not to carve the divine. Greek visitors call it primitive. Look and decide for yourself. A god can be presence without a face. Dushara does not need human eyes to see. What the gods do demand is incense. The first and finest cut of every caravan burns for Dushara before a single bale is sold. Business and heaven sealed in one fragrant smoke. In Petra, the two were never separate. The king's name is Rabble, the second of that name. His coins carry the title his people gave him, he who brings life and deliverance to his people. He has reigned for 30 years. Strabo, writing a century ago, recorded what Greek readers refused to believe about Nabataean kings, that the king serves his own guests at banquets with his hands, that he answers for his rule before the assembly, that no one drinks more than 11 cups, each from a fresh golden goblet. Take Strabo lightly. Much of it is an outsider's tale, grown in the telling. But this much rings true. Petra is not Rome. The distance between a caravan lord and a camel boy here is money, not blood. And yet there is one thing Tame notices and tries not to. The king is old, and the king is rarely home. More and more the court sits at Basra, far to the north, closer to the grain, closer to the new roads, closer, though no one says it aloud, to Rome. Afternoon. The light goes wrong. Over the western mountains the sky turns the color of a bruise, and thunder rolls. But not one drop falls on Petra. Tame freezes anyway. Every child here knows the rule. The rain you don't see is the rain that kills. Somewhere up on the plateau, a cloudburst is emptying into the wadis, and every dry canyon for miles is funneling it toward one place: the sick. The beautiful crack you walked through this morning is becoming a gun barrel. Water, mud, and boulders moving faster than a horse can run. Horns sound across the terraces, and then Petra does the thing it was built to do. At the mouth of the Seek, a dam catches the flood and throws it sideways into a tunnel cut 90 meters through solid rock and sends it roaring down a neighboring canyon, away from the city into waiting cisterns downstream. The killer arrives. The city drinks it. On the terraces, the merchants barely look up from their bargaining. The desert tried to murder Petra every winter. Every winter, Petra said no. Evening. The low sun ignites the sandstone, and the city earns the name a poet will one day give it: Rose Red. Tame takes the long way home, past the theater. Yes, Petra has a theater, carved row by row out of the living mountain, seating thousands by some estimates, and cut straight through older tombs. You can still see their dark doorways gaping behind the upper rows. The dead were edited to make room for the living. Here, memory and ambition share the same cliff. High on the path, a procession climbs toward Adir, the great facade on the summit, broader than the treasury, plainer, newer. The stone still pale from fresh cutting. Below, lamps begin in 1,000 windows. 20 to 30,000 people, by some estimates, are settling in for the night in the middle of one of the deadliest deserts on Earth. Behind no city wall, because the mountains are the wall. This is the peak. Hold this image: the lamps, the incense, the water humming in the pipes. Cities rarely know when they are at their peak. Almost no one ever does. Night. On the terminal roof, Tame's father pours wine and names the neighbors one by one, like debts. Egypt, Roman. Syria, Roman. Judea, Roman. Jerusalem fell to their legions 30 years ago, and that kingdom no longer exists. Nabataea is the last gap in the map, allowed to exist because it is useful. Someone must run the desert roads, and Rome would rather tax the incense than escort the camels. We are not free, the old man says. We are unconquered. Those are different words. He turns a Roman coin in his fingers, heavy, stamped with a power far away. They will not need to break our walls, boy. Rome writes louder than we carve. The emperor now is Trajan, a soldier finishing his wars on the Danube. And when soldiers finish one war, they look at maps. Tame says what young men always say: it has held 400 years, it will hold. His father looks at the dark cliffs for a long time. Kingdoms are like wells. They almost never end in a flood. They run dry, quietly. And one morning the rope comes up with nothing but mud. 6 years pass. The year is 106. King Rabel II dies, of old age in his bed, as far as any source tells us. And then, nothing. No siege, no burning gates. The sources record no battle at all. The governor of Syria, Aulus Cornelius Palma, moves his legions south, and a new province is proclaimed, Arabia. The kingdom of the Nabataeans, 4 centuries of desert kings, ends with an ink stroke on an imperial document. Let us be honest about what we don't know. Was there a deal signed years earlier between an old king and an emperor's men? Did some garrison resist, its silence hiding pressure? Scholars still argue. What is certain is what changed quietly. The capital of the new province is not Petra. It is Basra, the northern city the court had already half moved to. The coins are restruck. The customs house where Tame weighed frankincense now stamps its receipts with Trajan's profile. Some cities die screaming, this one signed. And at first, almost nothing seems to change. Petra under Rome is still rich, for a while, even richer. The Emperor Hadrian himself visits in the year 130, and the city proudly renames itself in his honor. The theater is enlarged, the street grows grander, but watch the roads, not the buildings. The Greek shipmaster was right. Year by year, more incense leaves Arabia by sea, straight up the Red Sea to Roman Egypt, to Alexandria, the city of our last journey. And in the north, a different desert city, Palmyra, takes the Silk Roads in the eastern trade. Caravans still come to Petra, but 80 camels become 50, 50 become 20. Some seasons the southern road stays quiet for weeks, and the men at Tame's scales learn to wait. No one decided to kill Petra. No emperor ordered it destroyed. The world simply found other roads. The city was not murdered, it was rerouted. And a city built on a road, when the road moves, begins, slowly, still wealthy, still beautiful, to starve. Stand still and let the centuries move. May the 19th, the year 363. The ground heaves. A bishop in Jerusalem will write that an earthquake destroyed half of Petra in a single night. Columns drop along the colonnaded street, but the deeper wound is invisible. The dams, the pipes, the perfect gradients, cracked. There is no longer the money or the men to fully mend them. The machine that defeated the desert begins to fail, valve by valve, and the city shrinks toward its springs. Byzantine Petra is a modest town now, with churches and bishops where Tame never saw a cross. In one of those churches, a fire will one day char about 140 papyrus scrolls, and by burning them, preserve them for scholars 16 centuries away. Contracts, land records, family quarrels, the voice of a city long after its golden age. Remember Alexandria? Fire takes, and sometimes fire keeps. Another earthquake follows, then the long silence. Sand drifts into the doorways of the tombs. The Bedouin move into the caves and stay. Now the myth and the truth. The West will call Petra a lost city for 700 years. Lost to whom? The Bedouin lived in these tombs the entire time. Petra stood exactly where it had always stood. Europe simply forgot the address. In 1812, a young Swiss traveler named Johann Burckhardt, disguised as a Muslim pilgrim under the name Sheikh Ibrahim, tells his guide he has sworn to sacrifice a goat at the tomb of the prophet Aaron, high in these mountains. It is a cover story. Walking the Sikh, he becomes the first European in centuries to see the facade, scribbling secret notes, because being unmasked could cost him his life. And the name Treasury? A legend grew that the stone urn at the top held a pharaoh's hidden gold. For generations, rifles were raised at it, hoping to crack it open and rain down treasure. The urn is solid sandstone. The bullet scars are still there today. They were shooting at a king's gravestone. The real gold had walked past it on camels centuries before. Petra was never waiting to be discovered. It was waiting to be heard. One more night in the year 100. Tame banks the brazier, checks tomorrow's tallies, and looks out at the cliffs his grandfather helped plumb. About the future, he is wrong. The kingdom has 6 years, the caravans a few generations. But about the things that matter most, Tame is right. The rock will hold. The facades his people carved will outlast the kingdom, the province, and the empire itself. Rose red and unanswerable, while marble cities crumble. A poet will one day call this place a rose-red city half as old as time. And one legacy is stranger and greater still. The flowing script Tame writes his receipts in, those curving letters changing hand by hand, generation by generation, will keep evolving long after the kingdom is gone, until it becomes the Arabic script. The letters of half the world's prayers, poems, and street signs descend from the handwriting of desert traders. His father was right. Rome wrote louder. But Rome did not write longer. The kingdom ran dry. The water failed. The ink never stopped. Today, Petra stands in the same rose-colored silence, one of the new 7 wonders of the world. You can walk the same Sikh, with the same water channels carved beside your shoulder, and watch the treasury catch the first light exactly as it did for Tame. So here is our question for you. Petra's real treasure was never gold. Was it the water, the road, or the letters? Tell us in the comments which one you would bet a kingdom on. And be honest, did you believe the treasury held treasure? And subscribe, because the next city refuses to be believed. 16th century, southern India. A city of temples and royal water tanks where travelers swear diamonds are sold openly in the market street. Some call it the richest city on earth, greater than Rome at its height. 500,000 people. And after one lost battle, it burns for months and is never lived in again. Vijayanagara, the city of victory. We will meet there next time.